Telephone Call from Mama from the Spirit World by Cherokee Billie. My mother died suddenly October 20th, 1987, at the age of 67, from a heart attack. Earlier that year she had told me about health problems she had experienced, and I told her that I believed she had suffered a heart attack and needed to see a medical doctor. No, she said, they'll just pick on my weight, and I just don't want to stop eating because it's the only thing that makes me happy. I knew that my mother was a very unhappy person, and I couldn't argue with what she had stated. She had expressed for several years that she really wanted to die because she was so unhappy. She suffered from extreme physical pain all over her body, which at the time no doctor knew what it was, but I know that it was fibromyalgia, which is a torturous condition to live with. She had been talking to her best friend Veronica on the telephone when Veronica heard her make a loud gasp, and my mother said, "I've got to go." She immediately hung up the phone. This was at about 12:30 p.m. My father was at work and had tried telephoning my mother, and often she would not answer the phone as she rested a great deal. A voice pushed him to go home and check on her. My father was quite ill at 69 years of age, suffering from Parkinson's disease, and it was very hard for him to do simple things. He got into his truck and slowly drove to their house. When he got home, my mother was lying on the sofa, and he knew that she had passed away. They only had a rotary telephone, and it took him forever to dial 0 for the operator because of the shaking of his hands due to the Parkinson's and the stress of the situation. The operator connected my father to 911 and an ambulance was dispatched. I do not know how my father managed to dial my number, but he did. When I picked up the phone, all he said was, "I think your mama is dead." "I'm on my way," I told him, then hung up the phone. It took forever, or so it seemed, to get through Los Angeles traffic and reach my parents' home. When I arrived at their house, the ambulance had already taken my mother off to the hospital. I went into the house and the telephone was ringing, so I answered it. "What happened to you?" asked Veronica. She thought I was my mother because we sounded a great deal alike. I told her that I thought my mother was dead and that we were headed to the hospital. I hung up the phone and we proceeded to the hospital. My mother was pronounced dead in the hospital shortly after we arrived. It was an enormous shock for my father. I just made sure that he would be taken care of. The next morning at 6 a.m., my mother's friend Veronica was sitting at her kitchen table drinking a cup of coffee when her telephone rang. This was the normal time that my mother and her would talk every day right after my father left for work. She answered it, and my mother said, "I just wanted to call and tell you I was sorry I had to go so quickly yesterday. It was just my time. I wanted you to know that I'm okay and the happiest I have been in years. I can eat anything I want and don't have to worry about gaining weight. Well, I have to go, but I wanted you to know that I am fine. We will meet again, but I have to go now. Bye." Veronica stared at the phone, listening to the dial tone. She could not believe what she had just heard. She felt that nobody would believe what she had just experienced. We gathered at my parents' house later that day, and Veronica told me what had happened. I believed it immediately because that sounded exactly like what my mother would say. Many people thought Veronica was crazy, but they just didn't understand communication from the spirit world and the love my mother had for her friend Veronica. All these years later, I find the message my mother left extremely comforting and look forward to reuniting with her in the spirit world.